Good afternoon. I'm Robin Jacobs, Chair of American Friends of Bar-Ilan, South Florida, and National Board Member at the university. I'm pleased to welcome you to today's program, The Fight for Women's Rights After October 7th. Will the international community hold Hamas accountable for the sexual crimes of October 7th, and who is working to make that outcome a reality? Here to delve into this pressing question is Professor Ruth Halperin-Kaddari, founding academic director of the Rackman Center for the Advancement of the Status of Women at Bar-Ilan University's Faculty of Law. Professor Halperin-Kaddari has led the fight for women's rights and gender equality in Israel internationally for over 2 decades, including as vice chair of the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. Her latest initiative is seeking recognition for the victims of the sexual violence and gender-based atrocities executed by Hamas on October 7th. She works to achieve this goal through the Dinah Project, which she co-founded under the auspices of the Rackman Center. American Friends of Bar-Ilan University is honored to have Professor Halperin-Kaddari join us today for what promises to be a poignant discussion on the crucial quest for justice for the victims of October 7th, as well as the issue of gender equality in Israeli society. This afternoon, we'll have a dedicated Q&A at the end of this webinar, so please do leave any questions you have for the professor in the Q&A box on Zoom. I'd also like to take a moment to remind you that your support of Bar-Ilan makes a tremendous difference for Israel and world Jewry in all times, but especially during this war. To support the incredible work of Professor Halperin-Kaddari at the Rackman Center and through the Dinah Project for Women in Israel and all over the world, you can do so by clicking on the QR code in the top right-hand corner of your screens. You'll also find a link included in the comment section here on Zoom. Without further ado, we're going to kick off today's program. And I was so privileged to hear Professor Ruth Halperin-Kaddari speak in Miami and to meet with her. And it was life-changing. And thank her for being here today to give us an important update. And in addition, to broaden our international community and update our international community of what the work is being done at the Dinah Project and the Rackman Center. So we have a few questions we're going to start with. And as I said, then we're going to open up to Q&A. Professor, once again, thank you. And given the anti-Israel bias at the UN and other international forums, what are the primary strategies you have used to effectively raise awareness about Hamas sexual crimes?
Well, first of all, Robin, I want to thank you for hosting me on this webinar, and to thank American Friends of Bar-Ilan University for organizing it and for giving me the opportunity to update, as you said, and to just broaden the knowledge, which is really key issue in this fight, which we're fighting for the truth, for the recognition, for setting the record straight, as I called it. And before I start, I also want to acknowledge that some of our partners are also here on this webinar, and we are very, very proud of all the partnerships that we've built since October 7. And just like you said, our partners are really critical to our success, and I'm glad that some of you could join us today. To answer your question, I think I really need to go back in time and to think about those days immediately following that fateful day of October 7 of 2023. And I need to remind myself how exactly I understood that one of our goals would need to be to fight for the truth to be known that Hamas, as part of the massacre, had committed those crimes against humanity in the form of the gender atrocities and the sexual violence against women, and later, as we also learned, against men. And recalling my own experience on the UN, on the Committee on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, I realized that I am set in a very specific position where I have a reputation as an independent expert, because when I was on that Human Rights Committee, I wasn't there as a representative of Israel. I was nominated by Israel, but elected by all the countries that are members to that Convention on Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. And I worked there as a representative of all women of the whole world, as an independent and impartial expert. And I know the UN mechanisms, and it is my obligation to work through these channels. And I also know that we have allies in the UN. And I think this is a very, very important message, because you said, given the known bias, yes, there is bias. Yes, there is double standard. Yes, Israel is being judged according very often to a much higher standard, and we can count all the decisions of the Human Rights Council, which are against Israel, which are like tenfold more than against any other country. It's all true. But we also have allies, and we have the channels which we need to operate. And one of them is the annual report of the Secretary General, which covers everything that took place in the world in which the UN was engaged. And in that annual report, there's always a chapter on sexual violence in conflict. And I understood that our goal would be to have the narrative, to have the record of everything that took place on October 7 with respect to the sexual violence and gender atrocities being recorded in that annual report of 2023. And if it is not going to be included there, then our opponents, all Hamas hailers and supporters, are going to be awarded with the best gift possible, because if it's not there in the annual report, it means that it didn't happen. It's not on the record. And that was one of our aims, one of our goals. And we worked very hard to get to the visit of the special representative of the Secretary General on sexual violence and conflict, Pramila Patten, who came to Israel at the end of January of last year, of 2024, with a team of experts. And she was mandated with the power to conduct a fact-finding mission, so that to collect, to record, to collect, and to analyze all the information that was then available with respect to the sexual violence of October 7. She published a standalone report in March. The findings of her report, which found reasonable grounds to believe that sexual violence, including, apologies for going into some details, including rapes and gang rapes, occurred in at least 3 places in the southern part of Israel. And with respect to the hostages, then a year ago, there was clear and convincing evidence that sexual violence was used against the hostages. And that was the beginning. That was a game changer in the path towards recognition and justice. But as I said, it's only the beginning. The next step would be to have a follow-up visit, and it would be to include this information and to have others also come and record and put it in writing, put it in the highest authoritative entity in terms of the universal recognition, in terms of the global recognition and the global justice, that is the validation that we need. And apart from that, or maybe I'll add to that also, within the UN, the special mandate holder, special rapporteur on torture, Dr. Alice Edwards, published a report this year about hostage taking as torture. And she also included information in that report, all the information with respect to the Israeli hostages, including sexual violence against the Israeli hostages. And that is another source of validation, another source of recognition. I can't stress enough the importance of having these entities which are accorded with the powers and the credibility of the UN, which come and say and state, yes, it did happen. Yes, there was so and so that many cases and that form of mutilation. And in the building block for our work is the fact that it occurred in multiple locations at the same time, with the same pattern, the same very, very high degree of cruelty and of barbarity. This source of validation that comes from those organs which are, just like you asked, usually deemed to be hostile to Israel. This is exactly what we need, and to find those whom we can trust, and who can be our allies, even if they also criticize Israel. If there's room to criticize Israel, it's important that they do that as well, to show their impartiality. But that's the message that the world needs to understand, that you can hold these two truths together. Recognizing Hamas for what it is, a terror organization that uses sexual violence as a weapon of war, does not mean that Israel should be absolved for anything or everything that it might do wrongly in its war in Gaza. You can criticize both, and there is this kind of false allegiance is something that we also need to fight against.
You know, you're so humble, because it's really because of your relationship you established before October 7th that they were able to bring the UN team in and establish get the correct messaging to the international community. So we really thank you. On a practical level, what developments and milestones would need to occur for Hamas to be adequately held accountable for its gender-based atrocities, and for the Israeli victims to attain some degree of justice? And I use the word some degree.
Right. So it's really important to understand that there are several venues for achieving justice. You know, in the law schools, we often talk about the multiple doors for justice, and here too, there is the level, of course, of legal proceedings, of trials, of criminal trials, and I'll get to that. But then there is also the level, which we already mentioned, the level that I call the historic justice, which is setting the record straight whenever there is any reference to sexual violence in conflict, in war, and with respect to Hamas, and these reports of the UN, and primarily the report that the special representative published and was adopted and incorporated into the Secretary General's annual report, This is the most important one because it can also carry concrete implications. And the Secretary General has the discretion to blacklist any state or entity or group or terrorist group, of course, for that matter, as an entity that condones and uses sexual violence as a weapon of war. And this is our next benchmark to get to the outcome that Hamas will indeed be blacklisted and will be recognized on the same par as Al-Qaeda and as ISIS and as Boko Haram, which had already been blacklisted by the Secretary General. So this is what we are aiming now. That is why I mentioned that we hope that there will be a follow-up visit by Ms. Patton and her team to collect and to record all the information that was accumulated since the last time since the time that she was here, including, for instance, first-hand testimonies and more eyewitnesses and ear witnesses. We are seeing it only in recent days that two of the hostages the returned hostages had allowed themselves to say some more, to say a little bit more. And we know that survivors of peacetime sexual violence, like everyday sexual violence, sometimes do not ever speak up. And if they do speak up, it takes a very long time, years and years. And we have to be mindful of this time for survivors, which is really different from the perception of time and the need for sometimes for faster process by the judicial process and by by those who who strive for justice on those other levels that I mentioned. So we have to accommodate for that. So I mentioned that report by the Secretary General that can lead to blacklisting. Blacklisting is also a tool to promote the issuance of designations, and which is something similar to sanctions. I will not go into concrete explanations of international law with all the differences between the two, but I think you can understand that this is the venue for making other states join the US, for instance, in of course recognizing Hamas as a terrorist organization and issuing sanctions not only against Hamas but also against its supporters, those that enable their operation, those that support them financially, etc., etc. Now, the other level that I mentioned before is the legal proceedings. It is the indictment, the prosecution of Hamas terrorists for perpetrating sexual violence and using it as a weapon of war on October 7. And these proceedings can take place in several jurisdictions, but the most important one, as we see it at the Dinah Project, is the proceedings in Israel, which we do not yet know when they are going to start. We know that the Israeli police and the Israeli prosecution are still engaged in the largest and most challenging investigation in its history. And our aim at the Dinah Project, and we are about to publish our report that contains legal analysis that explains and shows the legal means and the legal way to prosecute all the terrorists that participated on October 7 in the massacre, to prosecute all of them for the sexual violence that we know had happened, even if it's impossible to identify a specific perpetrator and a specific victim. We developed the theory of mass crimes, mass genocidal attack, where each and every person that joined that attack, knowing that they are going to perform, to come with the intention of total destruction and total annihilation of the Israeli people, then they are collectively responsible for everything that happened during that attack. So this is another venue and another stage which we hope to push for, and we really very much hope that the Israeli prosecution will accept our theory and the perception of justice as we think is proper to do here.
Thank you. And along those lines of testimonials, you provided commentary on former Facebook CEO Sheryl Sandberg's documentary, Screams Before Silence, bearing witness to the violence of October 7. What did it mean to you to participate in that film?
It was a very, very meaningful experience. It was quite early on. And looking back at the past year and a half, I can see, some changes along the way. Even for me personally, at the very beginning, just absorbing the information, looking at the footage, at the photographs, reading all the testimonies, talking to all the first responders. These were really, I think, the hardest conversations, the hardest encounters. And Sheryl Sandberg's movie, the producer approached me, as I said, quite early on, and I understood that this was going to be a very important work, appreciating, of course, Sandberg's position and her status as a celebrity, as somebody who is being looked up to and can really spread the word, spread the message. I obviously immediately said yes, that I would be using the expression happy is of course inappropriate here, but I'm interested to offer everything that I can from the vantage point and from what I had known then, and from the expertise, also the expertise on the international level, bringing my experience from the UN committee, where for so many times, I sat there for 12 years and I heard horrific stories, horror stories from women from parts of the world that I never really thought that we would actually share this with them, from Congo, from Sudan, from Darfur, Syria, Yazidi women. So it was really important for me to bring that also to this film, this record, which I knew would really play an important part in the struggle and in the war over the truth and over public opinion.
And it's wonderful that she gave yourself and the Dinah Project the platform to do so, and to get the word out there. As a national board member and chair of Bar-Ilan South Florida, and as obviously a woman, I would like you to share how the longtime work of the Rackman Center laid the foundation for the Dinah Project's current efforts. I don't know if everyone really knows the scope and breadth, so if you could share it, because it is incredible the impact you're making.
Thank you. Well, the Rackman Center, which has been established more than 25 years ago, very much the heritage of the beloved late Rabbi Professor Emanuel Rackman, has been leading the work in Israel, primarily in the area of gender justice, in the area of family law, and also the relationship of religion and state and its effect on women. And we are doing our work both as providing pro bono legal aid for women in divorce proceedings, for offering legal advice, pro bono legal advice for hundreds and hundreds of women annually, women coming out of abusive relationships, domestic violence. And we also do a lot of policy work and advocacy for gender justice, primarily in family law, but also beyond that, the phenomena which is growing in Israel, sadly, gender segregation and exclusion of women. So we're there on all these fronts, and we obviously also do the regular stuff that academic centers do: research, always hands-on research, publications, conferences. We also offer emotional support for our clients, collaborating with other entities within Bar-Ilan University, the psychology department, School of Social Work. And you probably notice that I have not mentioned sexual violence against women, because it has not been our venue of work until October 7. It has also not been my own expertise or my own specialization. My specialization is family law, international family law, comparative family law, feminist critique of law. But we have gained a lot of experience in promoting gender justice and justice for women in Israel, and using all our connections within the government, within the Israeli policymakers and service providers. And we also gained a lot of experience on the international front, not just relying on my own standing in the international human rights community, but also doing work vis-a-vis UN human rights committees and other venues of promoting gender justice through international human rights law. So when the need arose after October 7, and when I, with several other colleagues, found myself doing this work for advancing the recognition and justice for the victims of sexual violence of October 7, realizing that this is in fact a new front for fighting for justice for Israeli women. We understood that the Rackman Center is really the natural place, the natural hub from which we should start organizing and doing our work under and under an institution that has always been at the forefront of fighting for justice for women in Israel. And so the Dinah Project has been actually incorporated into the Rackman Center. We took our name from Dinah, of course, the daughter of Jacob. The story is in Genesis 34, and she's the first known rape victim in our heritage. And Dinah in Hebrew, it has double meaning because it also means her justice, din, hadin shela, her justice or her law. And something really very significant is that if you read Genesis 34, you notice that Dinah does not speak. She has no voice. And very symbolically, it is us working at the Dinah Project who took it upon ourselves to be her voice. And so the staff of the Rackman Center has really expanded, and we have among us former District Court Judge Nava Ben-Or, who was also previously the Deputy Prosecutor General of Israel. And we have Colonel Sharon Zagagi-Pinchas, who has formerly been the Chief Military Prosecutor. And now she's actually the director of the Dinah Project within the Rackman Center. We have Nurit Jacobs-Yinon, who is an artist and a producer, director, art director, Ita Pritz Gibson, who's a journalist, who's editor of Forward also. And we have the umbrella of the very, very well established and prestigious Rackman Center as an academic center at Bar-Ilan University. I think it's really also important to stress that the work that we are doing is always, as all the work at the Rackman Centers, it is always academically oriented. It is always done very, very meticulously, with using our expertise, using our knowledge of Judge Nava Ben-Or and Sharon Zagagi-Pinchas, experts in criminal law and in sexual violence against women. So this authoritative position as an academic institution is really giving us added value compared with also with other organizations and others who do work post-October 7.
I mean, your work in the rich Rackman Center has been both impactful and measurable in the human rights international community. And you touched on those relationships that have made a difference. Can we talk a little bit about Israeli media outlets and your relationship with them, and that the Dinah Project called on them to respect the privacy of the returning hostages, allowing them to heal away from the public eye, given the need for them to process their trauma and rebuild their lives at their own pace. Can you expand on the relationship and your approach as well?
It's always walking a very, very thin line. And I think that this issue of, on the one hand, needing to prove against all the denialism, against all the deniers, so needing to prove what happened, that it did happen, and what exactly happened, to whom, and how many. This need is there, yet on the other hand, we're talking about survivors, we're talking about victims, we're talking about families of victims. At the very beginning, all the talks that I gave, all the interviews, presentations in Israel, out of Israel, many politicians, diplomats worldwide, well, in Geneva, the High Commissioner of Human Rights. I refrained from sharing information which I had, or from talking out loud about sexual violence against the hostages, out of respect to themselves and to the families whom did not want this to be discussed, to be out in the public. But when they started talking about it, we understood that something has changed, that the realization that this particular issue of sexual violence is something that changes the perception of Hamas supporters, and it is something that changes the perception of the world media, and it may also push further for achieving the deal and for freeing the hostages, because all those who celebrate Hamas as resistance fighters and as freedom fighters, they refuse to allow anything to taint this distorted portrayal, and this particular issue of exposing them as rapists is what actually rips the mask off their faces. So, but there is constantly this dilemma of whether to talk more openly or to to disclose everything that we know, or to protect the privacy of the victims and the survivors and the families of the victims and the survivors. And as I mentioned before, it is really the survivors themselves should be the ones in control of the information. When Amit Susana, really one of the bravest women that I've ever met, decided to reveal what she actually endured in captivity, it was her decision. And the first person that she shared this outside her both family and therapist was actually Pramila Patten, when she visited Israel. And that, I think, really gave Amit the feeling that she can talk, and that she actually has, that's how she now feels, she has the obligation to talk and to do everything in her power when the female hostages were still there. So to do everything in her power to hasten their release. It's, I'm just thinking about one particular event when Amit was invited to the UN to address the General Assembly side by side next to a survivor from Nigeria and a survivor from a Yazidi woman and a survivor from Ukraine, and there she was, a survivor from Israel. That was validation, that was recognition. On par, sadly, all victims and survivors of sexual violence as a weapon of war. And it is thanks to the media, but again, the whole relationships here are very, very complex, and it is always walking this very, very thin line. I don't have, a magic formula to put the exact boundaries or to regulate it. It is case by case question.
And it's amazing how you imbue sensitivity with the science. It's a very tough balancing act. So thank you. We have a lot of questions in the Q&A. So I'm going to give you a few right now. We have about 20 minutes left. So we have a lot of questions. First question from our audience is, how has the new U.S. administration changed the narrative and or changed how are you working with international entities?
I think it's a little too early to tell.
Tough audience.
We have established working relations with the previous administration, and we are now working on establishing working relations with the new administration. I'm not even sure, can't say definitely whether the US ambassador to the UN had already been sworn in, but before she's sworn in, we could not yet approach her. What is quite certain is that things are going to change, and that we might be given a more sympathetic ear. On the other hand, we are not we are not aiming to only align with one state, whether it is the United States or any other state. Our goal is to send the message that our fight is for justice for all victims of all conflict-related sexual violence. And that is why we have already formed relationships with sister organizations in Ukraine, Female Lawyers Organization in Ukraine. Our members of the Dinah Project, Judge Nava Ben-Or and Ita Prince-Gibson, had participated just last week at the CSW, the Commission on the Status of Women at the UN, and they participated in a number of events that addressed conflict-related sexual violence, not specifically on October 7. We are being supported by the British mission to Israel, and the UK is actually one of the world leaders in fighting against, or fighting to eliminate, to end impunity for conflict-related sexual violence. So we are really attempting to develop working relations and good working relations with a range of international actors, and we hope that the U.S. new administration will also be favorable on that.
Someone is asking a question: if your legal theory on mass responsibility is accepted and legal proceedings go forward in Israel, what would be the legal actions, if any, that can be implemented against the perpetrators?
Well, I wish I knew the answer for that. Right now, our impression is that the Israeli prosecution still wrongly holds on to more traditional perceptions of how to prosecute for sexual violence. The traditional perception that for a successful prosecution, one needs to have a specific perpetrator and a specific individual victim, and to have proof of physical forensic evidence that actually prove the sexual act that was perpetrated against the victim. This is not going, you're not going to have it with respect to October 7. And usually when sexual violence is committed as part of war, as a tool of war, as a weapon of war, no such evidence exists. That is the characteristic of mass atrocities and mass perpetration, and specifically of genocidal attack. And the whole perception needs to change. We call it a paradigm shift. The whole paradigm needs to change, and to realize that when sexual violence is used as a weapon of war, it is not like everyday sexual violence. The intention is different. The acts are different. Very often, and forgive me for going into some more details, but very often it is not just rape, or not even rape, it is mutilation of the sexual organs, because it is directed against the reproductive capacities and the reproductive organs of those victims. And when it's usually women, but sometimes also men, but when that woman is violated and is mutilated and is conquered, it is as if the whole nation of the enemy is actually being invaded and conquered. So she's not the individual, she symbolizes the collective. And the perpetrator is also not doing it as an individual criminal. He's doing it as part of the collective that set on with a genocidal intent to annihilate and to destroy and to destruct the whole nation of the enemy. So the justice system has to understand this change in how to conceptualize these types of crimes, and the prosecution needs to be done accordingly. That's the work that we are doing. We are constantly engaging, talking, and hoping to convince those the decision makers in the prosecution, so that when finally they're going to charge those terrorists who Israel holds now, that sexual violence will be part of these charges.
Why do you think so many advocates for sexual violence survivors remain silent or fail to address the sexual atrocities committed by Hamas after October 7th? And what can be done to ensure that such crucial issues are not overlooked in the future? Tough question.
That's one of the toughest questions. And this is what actually makes our work so critical and so essential. Women's organizations, international women's organizations had failed us. International human rights organizations have failed us. A lot of entities within the UN, but not all of the UN, has failed us. But what is really important to understand is that by keeping silent, and what's worse, by also denying, some of them actually deny, they're not just failing Israeli women or Jewish women, they're failing humanity at large. because the message that they send here is that not all victims are equal and not all perpetrators are equal. And if perpetrators are deemed as resistance fighters, then they can actually walk away with complete impunity, which is a terrible message to send to all other terrorist organizations. They can perform these horrific atrocities and get away with it. The reasons range between what I hinted to before, the inability to understand the complexity of a situation and the complexity of a conflict, and that sometimes the side that had always been seemed to be as the you know the bully or the villain had actually been the victim, and the side that had always been perceived to be as the ultimate victim was in fact the villain and was in fact the perpetrator in this case. And I think that many of these on the global left and many of these organizations were simply unable to step out of their conventional boxes of mindset and understand that things are much more complicated than this. Then there's obviously also latent anti-Semitism that had always been there and gone to the surface after this attack in a completely distorted twist. You would have expected sympathy would be with those who were attacked on October 7, but this held only for a day or two, not longer than that. In terms of world opinion, the war zone had actually shifted to social media, and we're definitely losing there. The pro-Palestinian and worse, pro-Hamas supporters have unlimited amounts of unlimited resources, and they immediately employed all their army of bots and AI to start the denialist campaign. As one of our allies, Jewish Women's International in New York, have just released a report on the role of social media in amplifying in actually enhancing the victimization of victims of conflict-related sexual violence. Meryl Frank wrote this really enlightening report that shows that while these social media campaigns have always occurred also in Ukraine and in Sudan, and I think she also looked at Myanmar, but post-October 7 was the fastest campaign of making this question of sexual violence controversial and to deny it, and also to turn it into a tool to attack a whole ethnic group beyond the national group that was specifically attacked during that during that war, namely the whole Jewish people. So this, I think, cannot be explained by anything else besides anti-Semitism.
To state the obvious, that is why your work at the Rackman Center and the Dinah Project is so important. It really is. We had think time for, we have like 20 more questions. We only have time, I think, for one more before we have to close. So we'll answer briefly. The UN does everything in its power to negatively portray Israel. Is it possible to bypass the organization and their bias to reach your goals? Another tough question. Yeah.
So my approach is that the UN is full of faults and wrongdoings, but it is what we have, and the world would be in a much, much worse situation without the UN. We had the League of Nations before, it didn't work. The UN has to change, but the way to change it is from within. And we need, as I said before, to find our allies within the channels of the UN. There is simply no other way. We cannot step out of the UN. We're not, Am levadad yishkon is not something that we can adhere to. The whole existence of Israel is thanks to the decision of the UN, but we must keep on fighting against those powers within the UN and outside the UN who deny our truth and our justice. And we have to do it with all the allies that we have, and we have to collaborate with others beyond us in Israel. We have to partner. We have to, I'll just mention in one of my visits to Canada, which is probably one of the places that really suffers most from a wave of anti-Semitism now. I was invited to a conference by an organization of Islamic Conference Against Anti-Semitism, which has thousands and thousands of members. And it was such a wonderful revelation to find allies in the most unlikely places. And this is the way where we have to go.
Build those relationships.
Yes.
Speaking of relationships, we want to thank you and everyone who established a relationship with us today here on this program for coming on the webinar. And we apologize for any questions we weren't able to get to today. And you can send them to info@afbiu.org. We want to thank you again for those of you able to support the inspirational work of Professor Halperin-Kaddari at the Rackman Center and through the Dinah Project. You can do so by clicking on the QR code in the right-hand corner on the screens to donate to this incredible project. And if we have 1 minute, we just want to thank you also for your contributions to October 8th, the movie, which was just released and at the AMC theaters. And the theme of the movie focuses on the increase of anti-Semitism, but provides an orientation to events of October 7 and includes the issue being discussed today. And we thank you for all those contributions and all the impactful, meaningful, and such important work that you're doing on behalf of the women, and not just the women in Israel, but across the world, the international community. We can't thank you enough.
Thank you very much, Robin. Thank you for.
And hopefully soon again in Miami. Yes. And thank you for my beautiful, beautiful poppy pin that represents the wonderful project and work that you're doing at the Dinah Project. And we look forward to seeing everyone again on the next seminar and webinar with the professor. Thank you.